Hello, everyone. Welcome to our October edition of Modonaut Monday. In this session, we are going to be discussing Falloffs, the Workplane, action centers, and snapping. Over the next hour, we'll be discussing some of the fundamental features that make Modo the powerful modeling tool that it is. If anybody is having any trouble hearing me, please let me know in chat. I just muted the live YouTube feed of this session. Again, I'm Ed Ferrari from Foundry, and as always, I'll try my best to keep an eye on the chat window. So if anyone has any questions about what I'm doing, please feel free to ask. My only request is that you be mindful of the delay in the stream. So if you ask a question, it's always best to be specific because you might be asking about something that I did 15 to 20 seconds ago, and that could confuse me. And especially today, I took some of your feedback and I increased the quality for the recording, which means that the delay might be a little bit more evident this month. So I'm only mentioning this because I want to be as helpful as possible. Ultimately, you should feel free to ask just about anything. So let's get started learning about the Workplane, Falloffs, and action centers. So if you see my screen here, I'm in the most recent version of Modo. This is actually the public beta of 12.2. So if you are on the Modo subscription plan or the Modo maintenance plan, you should have access to this in the public beta section of our Foundry forums. So I'm in the Modo layout, and I think the best place to start is probably the Workplane. So let me quickly toggle my Workplane on. At the moment, I can see the grid, but I can't see the Workplane. So a quick way to access your Workplane is to press the star on your numeric keypad, and that brings up this little menu here where you can have it set to never, which is probably what it's set to now, or always. And if I click that, now you can see our Workplane, and this is this white or light gray grid. And if I press that star again, I can have it set to active, which means it will only show up if it's set to something custom, which we will get into in a moment. So let me just quickly press star again and set it to always. If you don't have the numeric keyboard on your keyboard, you can press the O key to bring up your 3D viewport properties. And then in the visibility side tab, you can set your Workplane from always to never or active. So it's the same little 3-option menu that you have by pressing the star key or the asterisk key on your keyboard. So again, I'll just set that to always for now. Okay, so what the Workplane actually is, I like to think of it as a plane of glass that is set to one of the major axes. And if you look in the bottom left-hand corner of your 3D viewport, you can see a little box, a little kind of gray plane, which represents the Workplane. And this is dynamic. So if I tumble or orbit my view, the Workplane will always kind of snap to one of the major axes. You can see it down here, as well as in the main 3D viewport. And as I mentioned, I like to think of it as like a kind of a pane of glass that I can kind of work on. It kind of controls the depth of where we create new primitives and where our action handles kind of are positioned. So it's kind of takes the role of the ortho views or the orthographic views, which we can get to by pressing the 0 key on the numeric keypad, or if you don't have a numeric keypad, you can press Alt-0 on the main keyboard. Alternatively, to maximize the screen, you can click these little double diagonal arrows in the top right corner of your viewport, just to maximize the screen. So previously, in working with 3D, we would be very reliant on these orthographic views. But if we use the Workplane, we don't really need them. We're not as reliant on them. So I'll just create a quick plane on the Workplane here. So I'm just clicking on the cube, and then I'm drawing out a plane. And you can see that it's actually sticking to that Workplane. And let me actually frame this up. If I hold Shift, I can create another plane. And hold Shift, I'll create another plane and another plane. And we can keep creating planes. And they're always going to stick to that original Workplane unless we change the view. So now I'm looking down the X-axis. So now the dominant Workplane is the ZY plane. So now when I start drawing out planes, they're all sticking to this ZY plane. You can see it here in the bottom left-hand corner. And similarly, there's one more major axis, and that's the plane of ZX. So if I continue to draw out planes when my camera is positioned this way, you can see that I'm drawing out planes there. So these are the three major axes. And if it helps you to kind of see this, I could actually, let me just quickly delete what we just created. So delete those. I'll press N for a new mesh item and hide that original plane. And I'll just draw it. I'll draw out three kind of large planes that are each adhering to the major axes. You can see it's very easy to kind of draw anything on these axes, but you don't always want to be drawing things on one of these axes. While it's great, sometimes you want to, let's say, create a cube on a specific part of an existing mesh. So let's say I want to create a cube right here. Currently, what I might have to do is maybe draw out a cube. So I'll draw it out like so, and then I'll just try and position it the best I can. This is where we might want to press Alt-0 to bring up the ortho views, and then maybe work in multiple views to kind of position it like so. And then we can rotate it like so. And this is a little bit tedious, so there is a much easier way, and this is where the workplane comes into play. So we can align our workplane to existing geometry. So in this case, I'll select this mesh item and then go into polygons mode by pressing 3. And I'll select some of these polygons, like these right here. And I'll click on the workplane button right here. And you can see that the workplane, it's this gray-white grid, is now kind of adhering to that selection. So there's a shortcut for that. To get back to the original workplane, I'll press the End key on the keyboard. And you can see here our little widget kind of reset itself so that it's now aligned with the world kind of axis. But then to get the workplane back, if I don't feel like coming up to this workplane button, I can press Shift Home with this selection. So you need a selection, and then you press Shift Home, and that causes the workplane to snap to that selection. So now, if I come over to the Cube tool, and I start drawing out my cube, you can see it's kind of sticking to that workplane. And if I hold Shift, I can draw out another cube and another cube. And say now we want to draw a cube on top of this cube. Well, I can just press 3 for polygons mode, select this polygon, Shift Home to align the workplane to selected. And then now I can click on my cube tool and start drawing out more cubes on top of this new cube. Okay, so that's one of the benefits of using the workplane. And if I hold Alt and click on the workplane button, we have all of these workplane options in the workplane palette. So let me just quickly delete these cubes that we just created. I'll press End to reset the workplane. And again, let's say we want to align our workplane to this polygon. We can press Shift Home, or we can click Align Workplane to Selection. And now the workplane, it's a little bit, might be a little bit difficult to see, but it's aligned to that polygon. Now, to reset the workplane, we can press End, but we've already kind of gone over that. So I'll show you this option, Rotate Workplane. This brings up a little Rotate Workplane dialog, and I can change it to something like 15 degrees and click OK. That just rotates the workplane. So that's a very a simple tool. I don't use that very often. Similarly, we have Offset Workplane. So if I click that, and then let's say offset it by 500 millimeters and click OK, it just offsets the workplane 500 millimeters from that selection. We also have Edit Workplane, which kind of gives you options for changing the center and the rotation. So if I just change some of these, like so, change the rotation a little bit, and then click OK, the workplane will update to kind of reflect those changes that we made in the edit workplane dialog. That's another one that it's very specific. You might need that, once in a blue moon, but it's good to know that it's there. So I'll just press End to reset the workplane. And this time, maybe I will Shift Home back on these original 4 polygons. And it doesn't just work with polygons. If you, let's say, select these verts and Shift Home, will align to those verts. Now, if you only have one vert selected and you press Shift Home, it doesn't know the orientation, so it just chooses that vert as the origin of the workplane, and the workplane itself is oriented to the world, so it just stays kind of centered on that original vertex. You need 2 or more vertices to kind of get the orientation to change. So with 2 vertices selected, if I press Shift Home, the workplane kind of orients itself to the average normal of those 2 selected vertices. And similarly, if I choose 3 and press Shift Home, it just helps it find its. It helps the workplane find its orientation. So with this selected, I can come over to the edit workplane. We already went over that. The workplane tool, and this is an interesting one because when you click it, it doesn't look like anything has happened. But if I click the tool properties or press K for the tool properties shortcut and pin that, we have this little preview icon. If I uncheck that, and let's see, let me just refire off that. Might have to actually see the workplane. Wonder why that's not showing up. We show up, click on the workplane tool. There should be little handles. I don't know why I'm not seeing those. Let me press the O key, make sure that I can see my grid. Over to View. Advanced. I might have to come back to this one. We should be seeing some handles here. Let me press End. And I don't know why I'm not seeing the actual workplane tool handles. Try one more thing. We'll just check out the tool pipe. And not sure why we're not seeing that. But we'll just skip that and we'll come back to it. Okay, so the next option is this lock plane to origin. And this is something, let me just press End to set the reset the workplane. If we actually start to create a cube, and then I'll hold Shift and we'll just create another cube, Shift, create another cube. And then let's take this cube and just drag it in Z, and then I'll frame on it. And then I'll create another cube. You might notice that this cube didn't draw on the kind of parallel to these 2 cubes. And that's because this workplane at the moment is dynamic. So if I change my view to something closer to this cube, while it's aligned with it, or while it's kind of drawing along the same plane, it's not actually locked to the origin. So if I want all of my future cubes to be aligned to the same workplane, I would lock the plane to origin. So now when I create some planes, no matter where these planes are, if I drag it towards positive Z and then frame on that, and then create some more cubes, these cubes are still being drawn on the XY plane. They're not kind of drifting away like these cubes and planes did. So delete that. So that's definitely lock plane to origin is definitely useful. Now, align to screen is primarily used for the curve tools. So when this is checked, instead of let me uncheck it first, and we'll see what happens when we draw out a quick curve. So I'm drawing out a curve, and it's sticking to the work plane. As you would expect, it's on that it's on that sort of invisible piece of glass, that invisible pane. I'll just draw it another curve. So they all get stuck to the work plane. And if I come over here, it'll get stuck to the XY work plane, like so. But let's say we don't want it to be aligned to the work plane. Let's say we want it to specifically be aligned to our view. So by checking Align to Screen, we're now working on a work plane that is perpendicular to our view. This is dynamic and it changes. So now if I go to tumble around, you can see that this curve is not sticking to the work plane the way these three curves were. So that's definitely something worth knowing about. Now the draw axis, that's like a little visibility toggle. It just creates these little handles here, these little kind of world origin handles. And this is nice because when you do go to align the work plane to a selection, so I'll press Shift Home, having these draw axes enabled kind of just lets you know exactly where the origin is. And that's really handy because if I actually, instead of pressing Shift Home with a selection, if you just press the Home key with your mouse kind of hovering over a specific part of the geometry, just pressing the Home key will set the origin of the origin and the position of the work plane to a specific location on your mesh. And it's nice when you have the draw axes on because it just shows you exactly where the origin is. Now this is different from if you have a selection because if you press Shift Home actually sets the work plane origin to the center of whatever you have selected, whether it's one polygon or a combination of elements. It will just find the center of the averaged elements. So just pressing Home is another option for you. Okay, so bookmarks are relatively new and they're really interesting. So what this allows you to do is if let's say we'll take these polygons here and Shift Home to set the work plane to that selection. And I'll assign a bookmark. We'll just call this BM_A for bookmark A and click OK. And then let's select these polygons and Shift up arrow and Shift Home to align the work plane to that selection. And we'll call this BM_B and click OK. Let's do one more. We'll do these 4 polygons, Shift Home to align the work plane to those polygons, and then assign bookmark, and we'll call this BM_C, and this is for the that back shaft there, that back pillar. So now End to reset the work plane. And now if I come over to Use Bookmark, I can choose the bookmarks that we just created. So I just selected B, I can select A, and I can select C. But we can always kind of return to those work planes. So what's nice about this is if I go to A here, and then I'll just create a unit. Let me create a unit sphere by holding Control and clicking the sphere icon. It's going to create it at the origin. So I can just scale that down, and now it's at the center of this pillar. And if I were to, let's say, move this away in any any position, I can always come over to Edit, Center Selected, All, and that will center it back on 0 in World, which the World axis 0 is actually right here, but because we're using the bookmark with the work plane, it's actually centering it to right here, which is pretty nice. So let me press End to reset our work plane, and I'll just delete this sphere. And what's interesting about this is if I take these polygons and if I rotate these, let's rotate it like so. If I come back to the bookmarks, if I use bookmark A, even though we rotated the polygons, it actually remembers the work plane, because the work planes are actually based on the polygons that we selected. So it's kind of like a selection set where as long as we don't alter the geometry or the vert order, it actually remembers where the work planes are. So let me just undo that. And that is also true for moving things in items mode. So if I just move this over here like so, do something quick. Move this around. So now if I go to polygons mode and use bookmark A, you can see they still hold up, which is pretty nice. So those work planes are all still there. So that covers work planes. Another option that I like to use, which is kind of like using work planes, let me just press End to reset my work plane, is the reference column in the item list, which is this little locator icon here. This column is called the reference column. And it works, kind of solves a similar problem to the work planes in a way, but more on an item level. So as you can see here, if I come over to this item here, I have some position and rotation values here. And let's say I wanted to kind of mirror this. We could select these edges and come over to align work plane to selected, or press Shift Home. And that sets this as the origin, and then we can do a quick mirror. So that's one option that we know about. Sometimes that's not always available depending on your model. So what we could also do is we could reset this so that the position and rotation is set back to 0. So I can just reset all. Now we can mirror on the Y. But that's, again, that's a little bit, it's a few too many steps. What you can do is if you have an item that has position and rotation values in it, in its channels, you can click on this little button right here in the reference column. And that just switches our item from world space to local space. And if I press Alt-0, you can actually see what that does. Just focus in on this in the orthographic view. So if I click on the reference column, you can see that it just shifts our selected item into 0, 0, 0 in world space while maintaining its values. So there we go. So Alt-0 to maximize my 3D viewport screen, and then I'll just quickly, let's just raise this up. I'll press Alt-W to switch to an origin action center. We'll get into that hopefully a little bit later. So I just set the action center to origin, and then Shift-V for the mirror tool, or the mirror generator. And I'll make sure the axis is set to Y. And then we'll quickly select this edge. I think it was this edge, whoops. And we'll do a quick bridge, so edge, bridge. And we'll just add a couple segments there. And now when I click on this reference icon, sends it back to where it was in world space. So that's a quick way. If you have something already selected or already built and positioned or set up in the scene, you just click this button right here, and it sets it back to the origin where you can model, and then you can put it back. So that's pretty nice. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, let me actually just revert this scene. Let's start talking about Falloffs. So I'll just close this Workplane tool. So I'm going to select my plane here. And let me actually set this so that it's at the origin. So I just clicked on that little reference, and you can see everything kind of shifts. You don't have to do that, but I find that sometimes when working on things in polygons mode, it's better to have it at the origin. Okay, so the first falloff we'll look at in this falloff section is the linear falloff. So if I select that, you can see we get our tool properties. If you're not seeing the tool properties there, you might not see the palette. You can click on this tool properties button, or you can press K, and then you can just pin it so that it's always kind of floating. Okay, so if I right click and drag, you'll see we're actually dragging out this fall off here. And I'll just drag it so that it's kind of Let me actually click on, should be auto size. I'll just do auto size Z. That just aligns it to our mesh. And you should be able to see this purple kind of outline. This wider section is where all of the strength of the fall off is going to be. And then this narrower section of the fall off triangle is going to get 0 strength. And this is totally adjustable, and it's adjustable on the fly. So if this little triangle is a little bit hard to see, you can always come over to View, Show Fall Off. And that just gives us some more kind of visual indication of the strength of the fall off. I'm also going to press Control-1 to bring up my main pie menu and toggle the grid work plane off, because that's getting in the way a little bit. So as I mentioned, where we have these purple verts is going to get 0 strength, and the yellow or bright yellow verts are going to get the most strength. Now we can overdrive this in either direction. So these fall-offs are meant to work in combination with a tool. So if I press W for the Move tool and I start moving the polygons, you can see that only the left side is moving, and the right side is not. It's not receiving any of the movement. And I can even adjust that like so, and we can adjust the handle for the fall-off like so. And it's totally live, so we can totally move this around and get some really crazy kind of effects. But I'll just kind of auto size that to Z again, and I'll set that back down to 0. What's nice is that we have all these other options. So if I were to move this up like so, this is a linear fall off. You can see the shape of the fall off triangle is just pretty straight. If I change the shape preset from linear to ease out, you can see it kind of bows a little bit, and that's reflected in the geometry here. We can also do ease. That was ease in. We can also do ease out, and that gives us this kind of, here's the starting point, and it kind of eases out of it, and we get this kind of curve like so. And then we also have smooth. So that's that'll just give you kind of like a nice S curve. And finally, there's custom. And you can use these options to kind of change the ease in and ease out, which I'll show in a second, because I want to show that in combination with symmetric. So symmetric is pretty interesting because if I change that to end, it gives us kind of a mirror of the fall off. So if I adjust that like so, you can see this is the kind of thing we can create. Again, this is totally live, so you can you could change it, change the position of the center of the fall off. And this is totally this works in conjunction or combination with the shape presets. So I can do ease out to get a kind of bowing effect, or ease in or ease out to get this kind of rooftop effect. And here, if I switch this to custom, and we make one of these -1 and ease out +1, or was it vice versa? Let me do 1 and -1. You can get these kind of really bizarre effects. And then also symmetric, instead of being at the end, you can do it at the start. That's kind of interesting. So let me just move. Like here. And let me just undo that first transform really quickly. And make sure that I'm still on linear. And we'll go back to, there we go. Okay, now I'll go back to custom. I'll change this to 1 and -1. Or maybe I want them both to be 1. And that gives us this kind of weird effect. It starts off and it bulges, and then it dips in, and it's kind of like a double S curve. Let's undo that. So that's the linear fall off. Now the cylinder fall off, I have to change the axis to Y. And then here you have these, this blue handle and this red handle, and it gives you kind of just a cylindrical kind of fall off here. Whoops. So it's good for getting like kind of a bowed effect. But in all honesty, I I tend to not use the cylinder in favor of the radial, which is very similar, but it just gives you an extra handle. So if I hold Control and select one of these handles and drag on it, this actually gives us the opportunity to create these kind of bowing effects. And both the cylinder and the radial fall-offs kind of have this shape preset as well. So we can use ease in, which gives us a really nice, you can kind of see how the geometry kind of hugs that radial fall-off, those radial fall-off handles, unless you overdrive it like so. We also have ease out, which gives us this kind of tent kind of look. And of course we have smooth and custom. I tend to use ease in or ease out or linear most of the time, but it's nice to have the other options available. And I use this a lot with kind of more cylindrical meshes. Here, what I'm about to show you is very, very basic, but I kind of think it's worth seeing. So I'll create a plane really quickly, and I'll just Shift D to subdivide it once in Catmull-Clark sub D mode. And then I'll press B for bevel, and I'll just kind of bring this in a little bit like so. This is something that I do a whole lot when I want just like a nice circle or disc shape. I'll come over to Deform, Shift up arrow to grow my selection. Radial, right click just to make that more circular. Let me just undo that really quickly. So if I'm looking at this from a top view, it looks circular, but it's not a perfect circle, and that's where the radial tool comes into play. If I right click, you'll see it become perfectly circular. Let me just see. I think I might have. I think I have some double polygons there. So let me just quickly do a mesh cleanup. Geometry. Where's mesh cleanup? Here we go. Okay. I don't know what's going on here. Let me just recreate that really quickly. So I'll hold Control and click on the cube tool, select the top face, open square bracket to select the inverse, Control X to cut it away, select the cube, or what's left of it, this one plane, Shift D to subdivide it in Catmull-Clark mode, B for bevel, drag that in. Let me just check my bevel tool properties. I have group polygons on, so that wasn't the cause of that issue. Escape to drop the tool, Shift up arrow, go to the Deform side tab, click on radial, right click to make it more circular, Shift down arrow, right click again to make that inner group of polygons circular. And then we'll do another Shift D, Catmull-Clark, that again, Shift D, and let's just set this to radial. So with the radial tool selected, right click, Shift down arrow, right click, Shift down arrow, right click, Shift down arrow, right click. And every time I right click, it's just rerunning the radial tool. So Shift down arrow, right click, Shift down arrow, right click, Shift down arrow. And this is kind of unnecessary, but the whole reason I'm showing this is because if I come over to the radial fall off tool, and the auto size this, and hold Control and click on one of these handles so it kind of changes the shape all at once. This is just a shape that I make all the time, set to ease out. It's just a really good way to get kind of like a lens effect, or I use this a lot because it's all quads and it's totally smooth. And I use this with Mesh Fusion to kind of trim away certain pieces. So that's just something I thought was worth seeing. So I'll just delete this, bring that plane back. And let's move on to the airbrush. Okay, the airbrush is a fun one. So if I enable let me just make sure I'm in the plane, mesh item. If I come over to airbrush and I come over to polygon bevel, and I just move this handle up, you can see I have the bevel tool enabled, but when I move this up, it's actually nothing's happening. And that's because I have the airbrush fall off selected. So if I right click, I can change the size of the airbrush. And now wherever I brush is where the bevel happens. What's cool is that I can turn group polygons off. And now wherever I paint, we get the bevel effect. And you can kind of press Control to kind of reduce that bevel effect. And then you can still use the handle to kind of bring those up. You can use the handle to kind of bring that in a little bit. And I think I'm going to use this one to just show really quickly how we can make our own tools. I think this is really, worth knowing about. So any combination of tool and fall off and action center and even snapping, everything gets put into the tool pipe. So right now, this is a very simple tool and it's a little bit random. I don't know if you would ever actually have a need to create this tool, but I'll show you how to save it if you want to return to it quickly. So over here in the stats window, I have the pipeline. I can't remember if this is by default or not. So if you don't see the pipeline here, you can always click on this little plus icon, come over to data list and tool pipe right here. And that will actually enable you to see the pipeline. So this actually shows that we have the polygon bevel tool enabled, as well as the airbrush, fall off, and content preset. So let me actually just really quickly turn this off. So I'll turn off airbrush to none, and that disappears. I'll turn off the bevel tool, and that disappears. So right now the tool pipe is empty, and all I can do is select. So let me go back to where we were. Let me just undo all of that. And let's rebuild that tool. And this time, watching the tool pipe as that kind of tool kind of comes to life. So I'll select fall off, airbrush, and then I'll turn on the bevel tool, and I'll increase the shift value a little bit, and still nothing is happening. It looks like something happened here a little bit, but let me just, that might just be a little bit of an issue. I can quickly paint something and then undo. So now wherever we paint with the airbrush, we have the beveling. Okay, so let's figure out a way to save this. I'll right click on the polygon bevel and I'll save the preset. And we'll give this a name. We'll call this air bevel. And I'll click OK. Now if I press escape a few times and then come over to System Form Editor, I can just create a new form. We can do a pie menu. I'll just do a regular form. And I'll call this Ed's New Tools. I'll click OK. So here we have Ed's New Tools. And right beneath it, we have New Control. I'll just right click on that and click Add Command. And it's going to ask for a command or argument. This is just a little something that you can commit to memory. It's question mark tool.set preset, and you skip a space. And in quotation marks, you write the name of the tool you just created. So in my case, it's air bevel, and then close quotation marks, and I'll click OK. So now here is that tool. I'll just give it a name. We'll call it air bevel. So that's the label right here. And now when I right click on this, I can, let's see. On Ed's New Tools, I should be able to assign a key. So I'm assigning the key on my new tool menu. So now whenever once I assign a key, whenever I click that key combination, the menu will pop up and I'll have a little list of my new tools that I created. And at the moment, I only have air bevel. So let's do Control-Shift-B, and that's unassigned. So I'll click OK. And then I'll close the form. And now you can see I have nothing in the pipeline. I'm just able to select anything. But if I hold Control-Shift-B, I get my new tool pop over, and I have air bevel here. So when I click that, that gives me the option to choose the air bevel. And now I can just start painting like so. Let me just undo that. Raise that up and in a little bit. So now I can really start using that tool. So, I mean, that's kind of a silly tool to save, but while you're modeling, if you find yourself building the same tool with fall-offs and action centers and the existing tools, if you find yourself building that repeatedly, definitely worth assigning that to a little menu. And then what's also nice is in Modo 12.2, we have this little icon here for workbenches. If I click on that, we can click on Edit Workbench. So this is like a nice little new area where you can just fill it with any custom tools. So if I press Control-Shift-B to bring up my new tools and I just pin that, and then I click Edit Workbench, and this little button right here allows us to select anywhere on the screen. So let's say I choose Falloffs. I can click the Falloff tool. Now I have Falloffs there. I can do render. Whoops, I didn't mean to actually click a render. So I think I would have to first click the button and then click render. But if I don't want these, I can just delete them by right click, choose delete, and click OK. So what's nice is that I can click this button and then choose air bevel, the button I just created. And then now, instead of pressing Control-Shift-B to bring up that little menu, I can just click this button here, air bevel. And I have to turn off edit mode first. And now when I click air bevel, it brings up the air bevel tool options, or the not the options, but the little dialog. I should have actually named that like a name for a menu, because that's actually what it is. But now I can actually start painting. So that brings up that tool. So just a little quick sneak peek at how the workbench kind of works. Okay, so let me undo that. Let's get back to learning about these fall-offs. Okay, so fall off, we have screen, which is kind of useful. So if I press W, I'm trying to find a good area to work on for screen. Come over to here. Okay. If I press W and then right click, it will actually align my handles to the screen. So I can start, let's say, L for loop, shift up arrow. So I want to move these. I can just right click and start moving these. Oops. I don't know why that's not working. There might be some sort of, I might have something in my tool pipe kind of still active. Might have to reset my, revert my scene. So W, there we go. So screen. And for some reason that does not want to work. Not quite sure why. Okay, so the next one is element. This is super popular. Oh, I know what it was. So if I come over to screen and then K, I probably have not enough, not size. There might not be enough steps. Let me see. Yeah, that's what it was. So I was wondering why screen wasn't working, and you can right click to adjust the size of your screen kind of fall off. So all of these adjustments that I'm making are kind of parallel to the screen. So it's really good for nudging. It's almost like a nudge effect in a 2D image editing software package. Now, of course, you combine this with, moving your viewport, and then you continue to nudge it, and that's how that works. But again, the problem I ran into was I had my size set to 0, so there's going to be 0 effect. I'm not, it's not big enough to affect anything. And you can change the size dynamically by right clicking. Okay. I can't believe I almost missed that. Okay, so I'm just undoing. And now we'll move on to, looks like I ran out of undos there, maybe. Okay, so we'll move on to element. Element is kind of like screen, except for it's in 3 dimensions. So rather than being in screen space, you can kind of adjust this, and it's giving you a little bit of depth also. This is very prevalent in the element push and the element move options. So if I press T for element move, you can see that in the tool pipe I have an element fall off and an element action center. So those two modifiers combine to form the element move tool, which is a incredibly popular and incredibly useful tool. It's kind of like a 3-dimensional nudge. That's how I would describe it. Let's undo that. So after screen we have, or after element, we have noise. Now noise is pretty self-explanatory. It kind of just select this plane. Again, I'll turn on the fall-offs, so I'll show fall-offs. And we'll come over to noise. You can already see that some of the vertices are purple and some of them are yellow. If I change the scale of this noise to smaller, you can see it becomes a little bit more kind of varied. So if I press W for move, you can see we're just getting a very noisy kind of modulation there. So a lower scale will give you more turbulence. And then if I drop the tool and re-enable the tool with a higher scale, it's kind of less, well, it's just the turbulence, I guess, is also, or the amplitude of this is controlled by the actual tool. In this case, the transform tool, the move tool. Size is just controlled by this. So you can get some really good undulating effects by just changing the scale. Like so. So that's definitely something worth kind of experimenting with. And I should also mention two things. One, these are all, let me just escape out of that fall off. You can limit this to a selection. So if I select this polygon and right click on this polygon to create a nice little grid or selection of polygons, I can come over to noise and then W. And now the noise is only going to be affecting that selection. So definitely something worth keeping in mind. You're not limited to just using the fall-offs without a selection. Also, you can combine fall-offs. So the noise is a good one to combine things with. So if I choose noise, W for move, let me make sure, come over to view, show fall-offs. So I'll just make that a little bit larger, like so. Now let's say I don't want this Z positive section to receive this noise fall off. I can come over to the fall off section, and I already have noise checked, but I can also come over to add, and I can choose linear. And now it's added a linear fall off on top of the noise. So if I adjust this move handle, also adjust the linear handle, and I can say, okay, I only want noise on this side, or I want it to be less over here. I can do that. And you can change how these mix together, because right here we have the linear fall off in the tool properties, and then here we have the noise fall off. And you can stack this even more. So in addition to this linear and this noise, I can come over to noise and I can add a radial. So well, let me actually undo that. So let me rebuild this. So we have linear, noise, and radial. W for move. Move this up. So now we're only getting the effect where the in the radius of the radial fall off and within the limit of the linear fall off and within the scale of the noise fall off. So there we go. So they can be added. And here you can see radial fall off, noise fall off, and linear fall off. So it just stacks on top of each other in the tool properties. Now, the only thing you can't do is you can't combine two radials or two noises or two linears. There's just no way to do that. It looks like I don't have a linear. Or I guess I do, but it's not showing as a check mark here. But it is active here. So you can have two linears or two radials, as I mentioned. Okay, so let me just undo that. And obviously, that's good for a lot of things. Making terrain is the obvious option. So curvature is kind of an odd one. I don't find myself using this very often. So let me just select this, and I'll put that into local space. So I'll turn on show fall-offs, and then I'll come over to fall-off and choose curvature. And here you can see, I press R for scale. The parts that are concave, the parts that are concave will get no influence over the fall off, and the parts that are convex will get all of the influence. So again, this is kind of like a specialty one, in my opinion, but it's there to kind of explore. William Vaughan actually has a really good Vaughan in 60 seconds that explains this curvature fall off. Definitely worth checking out. Okay, so vertex map. Vertex map is a fun one. Let me see the best way to kind of show that. I have a coil here. And let's say I want to really quickly kind of reduce this coil. We can use vertex map. So if I come over to my vertex map list, I have weight maps here. And I have a bunch of options here. Let me just delete these. We'll create a new one. I don't want to delete the B-spline. I just want to delete these two. Okay, so delete. Okay, so I'll change the fall off to vertex map. And at the moment, I don't have a vertex map selected, so we have to create one. A common mistake that I notice people do when they use a vertex map is they don't think about the topology here. So if I were to come over to my setup button here and come over to weighting, and then control spacebar, choose a front view. I'll just quickly, let me draw out a linear fall off, because I'm going to weight this, but I only want the top to receive the weighting. So this part where there's a lot of influence, this is going to receive the weighting. So I'll adjust weights and whoops. And I actually have to create a map. If I don't create a map, it just weights it. It weights the edges, which we don't want to do. So I'll come over to new map and I'll call this top underscore weight, and I'll click OK. Now, when I click in the viewport, you can see the weight is changing, but there's no way to see it. I'm going to press Control 2 to turn on my VMap. And also we have this red color means it's totally weighted. So let me right click and clear that. If you don't press Control 2 to choose VMap, you can also come over here to this button and choose vertex map right there. So now with the adjust weights button selected, I can left click and drag. And you can see that just the top is bright red. And then as it trails down, there's a less weight. It's 0 down here. So I'll press escape to drop that tool. Now, this isn't, I'm showing you this because this is like kind of a warning. So I'll press Control spacebar to go to perspective view, Control 2, go back to default mode. And with this top weight map selected, I'll come over to fall off and I'll choose vertex map. And I'll press W for move. So now it's kind of doing what we want, but we're losing volume. So it's not maintaining the volume. And that's because that linear fall off that we used is just kind of weighting everything kind of too evenly. And we want this to be more topological. We want the weighting to kind of decrease along the length of the coil rather than the height of the coil. So let me actually undo that and Control 2, go back to VMap, and it's going to look similar, but you should notice a slight difference. So let me just clear this. And this time, rather than using a linear weight map, I'm going to make a selection. So I'll select this polygon. Select this polygon, shift up arrow, and come over to fall off, soft selection. So now when I adjust this weight, and I'll just right click, whoops, it always gets me. Actually turn off the adjust weight, shift up arrow. Trying to figure out why that's causing me problems here. Okay, so that's what we want. We want a giant weight map around there. So the influence of the selection is kind of growing along the length of the coil. Then I'll come over to adjust weights, and I'll just make that 100. And I think that's good enough. So now when I Control 2 to turn off the VMap, oops, Control 2, turn off the VMap, I have the top weight selected. I'll come back to vertex map and W for move. Now you can see it's starting to coil the way we would expect, where it's not losing volume. It's not kind of shrinking. And if we wanted this to collapse lower, we would have to come back over to this this weight map, and we would just grow that selection. So I'll select this, shift up arrow, and then I'll just enable the move tool, and I'll switch over to soft selection. I'm just going to grow that a little bit more, like so. Then I'll adjust the weights, and then I'll just left click and drag so that more of that red is creeping into the bottom of the coil, like so. So now Control 2, go back to default view with the top weight still selected, change my fall off to a vertex map, W for move, and then you can see that sort of action happening there. I actually liked it the way we had it a little bit. Maybe that was a little bit too harsh when I was adjusting that weight map. You can always adjust the weight map by going to VMap mode with the weight map selected, and smoothing this out. You can just smooth selected. Click that button there. So that's one option. Okay, so that's the vertex map. Path is interesting as well. Let me just go back to the plane. Okay, so path is pretty self-explanatory. Basically, draw out a path, and then choose your tool. Oops. Actually, make sure that I have my Falloffs visible. So go to none, go to path. Oops, let me turn off the move tool. For some reason, I wonder why path. This could be a 12.2 thing. I'm not sure. I don't think it is actually. Yeah, for some reason, my path does not want to. Let me actually center this on the world origin. So I just set the little reference icon. So now we're working in local space. And let me just try that one more time. So path. Because maybe Modo didn't like. It's very strange. I'm wondering if it's the other strength option. Oh, the size is 1 meter. That's what it is. Oof. I'm a little bit too quick to blame somebody else, and it's usually me not paying attention to the tool properties. So just turn off W. For some reason, that path doesn't want to come up, though. There we go. Okay, now I can actually see the effect. So I think it was a combination of me being in polygon mode, and I was selecting the polygon instead of, selecting between the verts. And then also just having too large of a size. I was at like 1 meter, so everything was moving. So that's another reason why having the show falloffs on kind of helps. Because now if I press W for move, and I lost it. Okay. Let me try that one more time. So path. Draw out a little path here. W for move. That is so weird. I wonder why that's not happening. It was like it almost worked a second ago. Huh. Okay. Last try, because I hate giving up. Here's my path. Okay, I'm going to reduce that to 50 millimeters. W for move. It just does not want to work. Okay. We'll move on to lasso. I think there's a pretty good existing path demonstration online, so we'll just go to the lasso real quick. So I'll come over to View, Show Falloffs, and W. Actually wants me to draw out my lasso really quickly. This is so weird. Let me actually revert my scene and see if there's something that I did with my scene that's causing this to kind of behave funny. Probably should have done that a while ago. Okay, so I'll switch over to my lasso tool, W. I don't know why that's not working either. All right, I'll move on to the image. Okay, so image is a pretty good one. This allows us to, let me actually increase the, I don't want to do Catmull Clark, increase the density here. Just divide this in faceted mode. Oh, and Brian is actually telling me to click in viewport. I'll go back to that and try that in a second. Let me just do the image viewport really quickly, or the image fall off. So let me just add a path. Let's come over to my desktop. I have a Modo logo here. So I'll choose this. So I will turn off repeat and see. I wonder if I have, I don't even know if I have UVs for this, but so we'll just see. Use selected UV. Let me just check if this has UVs. It should. So I'll come over here to UV. Yep, it's got them. Don't know why that's not working though. So over to image. There we go. Okay. So just by clicking in the viewport and then dragging up, I was able to use the UVs to kind of take this image, which we don't really need to see because we're using the selected UV map, and I was able to kind of raise it up. So that could be useful too. So Shift Tab, let me do that. Let me go back to the path, and I'll use Brian's suggestion. So path, click like so, W. Yeah, it just does not want to. Yep, it's a bit weird to me. I don't know. Okay, so we'll skip those. Now, selection is an interesting one. The best way to explain selection is that if I make a selection like this, also if I select one polygon and then hold Shift and right click, it selects kind of diagonally in between. That's really helpful. Sometimes I do that and I notice people aren't aware of that. Super helpful. It's good for making straight lines too. So if I select this polygon, hold Shift, right click, hold Shift, right click, hold Shift, right click, hold Shift, right click. It's just good at kind of creating boxed in areas. And then if you hold Control and Shift and double click inside, it'll select the inner part. And if you hold Control Shift and select on the outside, double click, it selects the outer polygons. So for this, I'll select some polygons, come over to View, Show Falloffs, and I'll choose Selection. And you can see only what's within my selection is being affected by the fall off here. And I can change the steps. A higher number will be kind of a lesser effect, or it'll take more kind of transformation to see the effect, and a lower number will be more extreme. So that's selection. And actually, let me undo that. Using the coil is another good kind of way to see the effect of selection. Let me just make sure I'm on the coil here. Okay, so I went to polygons mode. It's kind of strange. If something's a little bit odd with it might be, this is kind of strange. It might actually be, my mouse might actually be messed up because I'm clicking and nothing's happening. Okay, so I'll select these these polygons and invert that selection with open square bracket. I'll turn on the selection tool, and then you can see I have steps set to 2. So if I press W to move this, it's not, if you want this to kind of coil down and become a tighter coil, it's not doing quite what you might want. And you have to change the steps to get that to work. So it's a little bit difficult to know exactly what number of steps to kind of set it to get the appropriate effect. But it's actually, there's a logic to it, and I'll show you what it is. So let me just undo some of this. It all is determined by how many loops you have in your mesh, or how much topology that fall off has to cover. So for example, if I select this edge, and once again, I'll hold Shift and right click on this edge, it selects all of the edges in between. And down here, it says 50 edges. So that's a direct correlation to how many steps we have to use. So if I, once again, select those polygons, press W for move, and change my fall off to selection, steps at 2, it just isn't going to cut it. It's not going to do what we want. But if I change that to 50, then it starts to kind of coil down nicely. That selection there is much nicer. Now if I come over to View, Show Falloffs, you can kind of see that nice gradation from yellow all the way down to purple. Remember, when it's set to 2, everything is yellow. So those steps really kind of give you what you want. And when you combine moving with adjusting the steps gradually, that's how you get like a really nice kind of effect. You can really kind of finesse that shape the way you want it. Okay. So soft selection, I'll just come back over to the plane. Oh, we're actually over time, but let me just finish up these fall-offs. Back over to that plane. The soft selection is a little bit different. If I make a selection, I'll make a similar selection as to what we did with the regular selection fall-off. This time I'll use soft selection, W for move. You can see that if I right-click and drag, we have this kind of gradation outside of the selection. So now if I move this up, you can see the effect is actually bleeding out of the selection edge. So where regular selection kind of contains everything within, make that more reasonable. I think what's going on here. Like so, soft selection kind of goes out of the selection boundary. Okay, the last fall off is actually something that's new to Modo 12.2, and this is the coplanar fall off. So I will actually go over to this item for that. So if I select these polygons and come over to fall off, coplanar, W for move, even though I have these 3 polygons selected, it's actually going outside of, the fall off is actually going outside, and it's searching for any polygon that's kind of has a similar angle. So if I combine this with, let's say, Alt-S for a selection action center, and I start to move this, you can see that it's moving more than just the original selection. And if I right-click to grow, right-click and drag to the right to grow that, it will actually grow that like so. Now, if I have use connectivity ticked off, it will actually find anything similar to this angle. So if I uncheck that, you can see that Modo is detecting that these angles are similar. So when I move this, that's the effect that we're getting. So the new coplanar fall off in Modo 12.2 is just incredibly handy for that. So I actually lost track of time. I'm kind of fighting a little bit of a cold here. I think I was a little bit out of it today. But I hope there was some information that people found useful. So that just about wraps it up for today. On behalf of Foundry, I'd like to thank everyone for joining me. Thanks for everyone in the chat. It doesn't look like we had a whole lot of questions today. But be sure to check us out on our social media channels to just stay up to date with all of our latest news. On Facebook, we are at thefoundry.modo. On Twitter, we are at FoundryModo. On Instagram, we are FoundryModo. And for more Modo videos and quick clips, be sure to check out our Modo Geeks TV YouTube channel. And finally, if you have any other questions, feel free to email us at modo.help@foundry.com. And thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of October.